Peace everyone, Unmask here, and welcome back to another live critique session. I hope everyone had a lovely week and a great weekend. It's been a little while since I've seen you, since I was on a very small vacation over the weekend. Anyways, I am going to jump right into the artwork. I was going to have Udon with me today, and I was just about to get him out of his enclosure, but he was so he was so sweetly asleep that I couldn't bother him. He was just too adorable. I had to let him be. Anyways, first up is Diane, and this is the lovely portrait of Nico. The good news here is that the likeness is perfect. As soon as I saw the portrait, I immediately was able to recognize Nico in the portrait here. So you did a really good job, Diane, of capturing the likeness. You also did a really good job establishing the shapes of the dark and light areas of the fur, and that really helps capture the likeness aside from having the core features in place: the ears, eyes, nose, and mouth. The one thing that I would have liked to see is just a little bit more texture around the eyes and the nose, just to help bring those areas a little bit more in focus. You have some texture in the fur right around here, and it sticks out just a little bit because it feels like it has more texture there than anywhere else in the fur. And since you want to establish sort of the focal point around the eyes, some of that extra texture, if you had put some of that extra texture around the dark shape and also the transition from the dark shape into the light shape, that would have brought a little bit more attention to the eyes and just established that focal point. But overall, the colors look good. Uh, and like I said, it looks like Nico, and that's the most important part. It doesn't have to be a super realistic portrait. It just has to capture the likeness. So there you did really well. Hey there, Linda, John, Diane, by the way, Susan, Cherry, Rain, Margaret. Good to see all of you. The next project Diane submitted is this portrait, the sunshine forest flower portrait that we did some time ago. And you did a really, really good job on this one. This was definitely one of the more difficult projects that we've done in quite some time. There's a lot of things happening in this that make it difficult. The background here, I feel like the background has a little bit more edging. So what I mean by that is if you have a look at like the where the foliage and the trees begin, you can sort of see a little bit more of the edge of the tree than you'd like to see. It should be a little bit softer. A good example is like right here, you can sort of see how the tree just sort of flows right into the green background. And that's what you want to have with the edges of your trees. Some of these edges are just a little bit hard, and what that does is it's not necessarily texture, but it kind of is texture, and it breaks the illusion of that out of focus background. So anytime you have those edges, it's better to just let the colors bleed into one another than it is to have those edges, because that distorts that illusion of blurriness. And these trees in particular on the left, they my eyes sort of drift over to them simply because they're a little bit more in focus than they should be. But it still looks really good. In fact, um, the flowers and the translucent nature of the dress, the dress looks amazing. Like, I genuinely feel like I can see through that satin material, or whatever type of material that's supposed to be, uh, and see her arm through the sleeve. It's the colors are perfect, the values are perfect. And the next thing is the hair. The hair looks amazing. The hair looks so, so good. Of all the projects that I've seen from you, I think that the hair here is the best I've ever seen. Genuinely, like the hair is spot on amazing. You really captured the light that is glowing the front part of her hair, and then the flyaways and the texture is just it's so good. I just want to sit here and stare at it. Like, that's how good the hair is. It's just fantastic, just fantastic. The shadows across the forehead could just be a little bit darker, but I mean, there's not a lot to the face on this project. This project, one of the difficult things was how much of the side view of the face we are seeing, and those kind of proportions can be a little tricky. Not to mention the eyes are teeny tiny in comparison to the scale of the project. But I can't get over how good the hair looks. I wish my hair in this project looked as good as yours, even half as good, because the subtle green and blue shine to the hair is just perfect. Yeah, it's you absolutely blew this project out of the water for sure. All right, up next is Linda, and Linda did this portrait. She's been doing portrait after portrait, overachieving with the portraits. And I hope you don't mind, Linda. I did find the reference photo in the Discord, so I hope you don't mind that I brought it in. Because there's a few things that I did mention previously. Actually, I think it was the other portrait that you did for the last live critique session, and I touched on a little bit of capturing in order to capture the likeness, the really really key features are the shapes that you can identify between um, shadows and lights. And so I'm going to approach this one very similar to the way that I approached the previous one. If you recall, I talked about how if you break up the shadows like across the face like this, you can sort of draw this kind of shape here that divides the face into shadows and light. So this part of your grandchild, I think it's your grandchild. This is your daughter and her son, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly. So if we take this shape and we apply just a broad shadow onto your drawing, very similar to how I did the last one. So I'm going to just take the lasso tool here and I'm going to just put this shadow sort of the best that I can freehand with a mouse. I'm just going to take this shape and I'm even going to go down to the neck here like this because there's quite a bit of shadow there. I'm going to take this shape, I'm going to put it over here. I'm going to try to line it up the best that I can. And then I'm just going to fill it in with black and change the opacity to something like that. And with that shadow, you can see I didn't add any new colors or anything like that, but you can start to see that there is light and shadow much more clearly than like this. The difference in value, if we have a look at the difference in value here, say like the brightest part of his cheek is about here, right? It's that color, sort of a neutral tan gray, what you would expect. And then, forgive me, my nose is like super itchy. Uh, and now I'm going to take like the darkest shadow or what should be the darkest shadow. And we're just going to place these two colors together. Now there's a really clear distinction between the light and the shadow with your brightest color and your darkest color. But what if we do just the middle? So let's do like here is the brightest part on his forehead. And here's the darkest part that you have on his forehead. Those colors aren't quite as distinct in value as the other colors. And especially if we look at the reference photo, we have this color and then we have this color. You can see the distinction is higher. So what I mean by that is this color here is it's noticeably lighter than the shadow color, and this comes from your artwork. But if you look at the reference photo, you can see the distinction is much higher. This color is clearly darker. You know, if you separate these colors, these two colors here from your artwork by just a small distance, you would almost not be able to distinguish the two. But you'll always be able to tell the difference between these two. And that whole thing uh, helps establish the light. So try to keep that in mind when you're doing your portraits. Try not to try to forget that you're drawing somebody that you love, because I always it's a little bit of a psychology, but whenever you're drawing somebody that you love, you have a tendency to make mistakes by trying to avoid mistakes because you don't want to mess it up, right? Because it's somebody that you care about. And when you're drawing somebody that you don't know and you don't care about, you are a lot more lenient with yourself in allowing yourself to potentially mess it up. And so that plays a small role in it, on whether or not you're going to be able to do your best work when you're drawing somebody you care about. And so try your best not to care about who you're drawing, and let yourself be willing to make mistakes, be willing to mess it up, because the line between it being really well done and it being completely wrecked, it's very thin line, and you have to push the boundaries of your colors and your values to really capture the light and the glow of the people that you're drawing. A really good example is just looking at some of the colors, like the really bold colors that we see in the reference. If you look at this really nice orange color for your grandson's skin, like that's a really rich, vibrant color to be happening in skin. Another one is right here, the highlight in the nose, very, very orange, peachy color. And these colors give the skin a lot of life. So you want to make sure that you capture these colors. Like also the lips, look how bright red, almost salmon in color the lips. And then when we look at your lips, they're very subdued in color. So comparatively, let's grab the colors that you have. So you can see the saturational difference is it doesn't even compare. It's almost like you took the reference photo and just pulled out all of the life-giving colors. So you don't want to be afraid to apply those really vibrant colors. And sometimes, like I said, when you're drawing somebody that you love, you don't want to make them look wrong. You don't want to mess it up. You want to do it perfect. You want to make it look like the people you care about, right? So you have this hesitancy to mess it up because it's people you care about. And you have to be able to allow yourself to push the boundaries even when you're drawing somebody that you care about. The same thing with your daughter. If you look at her really bright orange cheeks, like this beautiful orange color in her skin, like sun-kissed skin. If we look at the cheeks that you have drawn here, it's khaki. Like it's super khaki and gray, and missing out on these colors devoids the portrait of the life that you want to give it. So don't be afraid of the color. All right. That's all I got to say there. All right. Up next is Margaret. Margaret, I think I saw you in chat, right? Did I see Margaret in chat? Yeah. Good morning, Margaret. Um, uh, let me see. Let me see. I just want to make sure I'm not missing any questions. Feel free to ask me questions anytime, and I'll try to keep up with chat. But I'm just moving right along. Margaret, your other photo, the Nico portrait, I did do some color correction on that to make it look like it wasn't under a blue light. This one, I think, might have had the same issue when you took the photograph. The colors look sort of subdued and lighter, but I didn't want to make changes because I didn't have anything in the photo. But perhaps I'm not going to talk about the colors on this one because I think the photograph didn't quite capture the colors well enough. But I just wanted to talk about like texture and composition and all of that execution. And you did a really good job. The background is quite good. Those blurry backgrounds are tricky, and you did a good job with the bokeh circles being soft and it really brings the subject out. So you did a really good job with the background. I know that it can be very tricky to do those kind of backgrounds. So well done on that. Good job on the branch with the texture. I think you captured the texture quite nicely. Some of the textures are uh, a little artificial looking. So what I mean by that is if we just have a look at like these little black lines here, notice how the spacing is a little bit too patterned. Like this, here's another example. Like these black lines, they sort of have this even spacing. And natural objects just don't have that repetitiveness. One of the more difficult things to do is to be random. Our brains are hardwired to recognize and repeat patterns. Um, we love patterns because they're comforting, but nature has a lot of patterns naturally, but they're not perfect patterns. Our brain likes perfect patterns, which is why flowers appeal to us so much because of their patterns. But when you're making something look natural, you want to involve chaos, and chaos doesn't have patterns. And so when you're making these textured lines and details, try to be as random and sporadic as possible. And that will go a really long way into making your objects feel more real, feel more natural. Uh, it's easier said than done. Being chaotic and being random is against our nature to basically its core. So it's very difficult to unlearn to do patterns. Okay. But I just wanted to point that out because it's not something that I have to talk about a whole lot. It's not something that I've brought up a lot. So it's important to recognize that. Otherwise, you did really good with the colors, the fur texture, the hands and feet, the tail. Your tail tapers off, and then it sort of gets fat, like right here. It gets strangely fat right there where it's bending. So just try to be a little bit more consistent with the shape of the tail. Just being nitpicky, but you do want to keep that in mind. The other thing is the transitions a little bit through here and this dark shape here. And what I mean is the transitions from the dark shapes of the fur also through here. You have the dark shape, right? And then everything around the dark shape is a lighter shade of fur. And your dark shapes, like for instance, this one here, you want to have a little bit more texture going in or out, however you want to look at it, from your dark shape to the lighter shapes. That way you reinforce the texture of the fur and you also have a softer transition from the dark values to the light values. So that's the other thing that I wanted talk about is just you have a little bit of it right here, but I feel like the where it goes from the kind of black to the light brown, you want to have a little bit more texture there. Otherwise, you did really good. You also did really, really good with the Nico portrait. Again, capturing the likeness, very, very important. You did a really, really good job on the things that I just said you should do a better job on with this project. And that's the transitions from the dark shapes to the light shapes. Your fur texture coming out of the darker shapes, like around the eyes or underneath the mouth, they're much softer. And you can see how it makes the fur feel softer as well. Um, and so you did a really good job on this one with those transitions. I feel like it's a little bit easier when those shapes are larger, whereas on the other project they're a little bit smaller and kind of finicky. But just try to keep that in mind. Those transitions from the dark values to the light values, especially with fur, go a long way. One thing I want to point out that you did exceptionally well here, the fur texture on the snout, I noticed that you used shorter lines to really get that short hair kind of texture, and then you have nice long lines for the longer parts of the fur. So really, really well done with the pencil control and identifying the short hairs versus the long hairs, and then using the appropriately length with your lines to create that illusion. But yeah, you did fantastic job here on Nico. Up next is John. He did this beautiful oil painting, and yeah, this oil painting is exceptional. I think that there's a limitation with the photograph, um, especially in the really dark values. I can't quite see what's happening in the dark values, because the shape of this looks like it's just like a black shape, and I don't. I can maybe argue that I see a little bit of blue, but I can't really say for sure. It honestly, that could just be the photo. But I also see it in the beak. It could be light reflection on the canvas. I'm not totally sure, but I think that you did a really good job on this, John, for sure. Um, where I would like to see improvement is uh, on the eye. The eye in particular looks very two-dimensional, and you may I have the reference photo. Why didn't I get the reference photo? Hold on a second. I have the reference photo here. Yeah, even in the um what's the word I'm looking for? Even in the reference photo, I can see that the eye looks very two-dimensional, but sometimes we have to change the reference because the reference isn't great. Um, the other thing, the other thing that I want to mention now that I'm looking at the reference photo. So here's what we can do with the eye. The first thing is we can darken the bottom. You have it a little bit darker on the bottom, but I think that you could go darker. Not that dark, just give me a second. Let's go with yeah, let's go with that. And then on the top, you guessed it, I'm going to use white. Maybe not pure white, but let's go with something here. Or maybe instead of a dot, I'll do like something like this, right? We need something. And then what you could do is you could grab this green. This green would be quite a bit lighter than maybe that green. And you can add a reflection on the bottom of the pupil. Something maybe not that light. Hold on a second. Let me erase that and put it on a different layer. So So something like this on the bottom of the pupil, because remember, you have that spherical shape. So the reflection or the highlight, it's actually a reflection. You're reflecting the ground on the bottom part because of the curvature. And I'm just gonna soften that just a touch. So it doesn't need to be real bright. It just needs to be slightly different color. So something like that. You can see with those three changes to the eye becomes a lot more three-dimensional, even if it's not in the reference photo. I just totally made up the highlights on the top. You could change that easily. You could get a character reference of a similar bird or just an eyeball in general and copy the lighting that occurs. But notice I used some of the background green to create the reflection of what's below the bird. And that creates a little bit more spherical shape in the eyeball. Um, the other thing that you didn't quite capture totally right is the cast shadow from the beak. You have the cast shadow started here, and it's pretty close, but it's not. Trying to just let me just yeah, sure. I'll just use that color. That's not how I wanted to do it though. I needed it on here. And let's just blur this. The cast shadow is a little bit darker. That's not what I wanted. There we go. Let's go a little bit darker. I'll change the color. Yeah, there we go. That's better color. And let's do overlay. That gives us, yeah, so it's something like that. It's a little bit darker overall around the neck of the bird, and you can see it just creates a little bit more depth um, and light. The other thing is also the highlight here. The highlight here, I feel like needs to be a bit brighter and a bit sharper to really bring home the smooth nature of the beak. So the smoothness of the beak is established by the sharpness of the highlight. The sharper the highlight, the smoother it is. You can think of it like the difference between like stainless steel metal and then polished metal. The highlight hitting like stainless steel is very diffused and spread out, and you can still see a lot of swirly marks from like the sandpaper. But polished metal, like chrome, has those really crispy highlights with the sharp edges because it's smoother, it's polished, and the beak has similar. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Sorry about that. The beak has a similar characteristic, although I'm looking at the reference photo, it has softer edges, like it has a bit softer edges, but the core of the highlight is a bit brighter. All right, that's all I'm going to do with the bird, but I think that you did a fantastic job for sure. All right, moving on to Susan. Yes, Susan, I was looking forward to seeing your work. Let's see. So this is the Tarsia project. Susan, sorry, I was reading through chat. um, and I like what you did with the background here, Susan. You kept it soft enough that it still comes off as a background, but I really like the color choice and the um, composition of it. The branch coming in and the tree sort of curving around it, the composition of it is really appealing to uh, the tarsia sort of cutting through the page horizontally. Um, I like the background a lot. Yeah. Um, Now let's talk about the hands. The hands are a little all over the place here. I think if if you cleaned up the edges of the hands just a little bit to help distinguish them from the tree branch a little bit, that would go a long way. But everything everything about the Tarsia's hands looks weird anyway, so I'm not going to hold any of that against you. Um, the one thing, like the fur texture has your characteristic. I knew exactly, like you did the Nico project too, and I knew that you were doing this one, so I knew exactly what it was going to look like because I've been looking at your artwork for years, Susan, so I know exactly what your artwork looks like. And anytime you do fur, it has that Susan characteristic. Everybody can identify Susan's artwork because she just has this unique characteristic, especially to fur. Like fur, hair, anything. It's such a Susan characteristic, and I love the fur here. I love all the texture going going in the right direction. I think this area here, the the direction is a little bit difficult to distinguish in the reference photo. Um, but I think that these three dark lines here, they sort of break the illusion just a tiny bit. So their direction it feels just a tiny bit off because you have, let me grab a different color. So you have this fur and this fur and this fur sort of all going down in the general same direction, but this line here changes directions without too much. What's the word I'm looking for? It changes a little bit abruptly there, the direction. And so what you would have wanted to do is have this one like this, and then this one slightly curved, and then this one slightly curved more, and then this one. And that way it sort of wraps around the knee a little bit better. So that part on the fur being a little nitpicky. The other thing that I think maybe you could consider in the future for whatever other animal you may do is distinguishing the texture from the fur and the eyes. So, not all animals have eyes as strange as this one. Partially why we chose to do this project, but or why I chose to do it. If you smoothed out the eyes so that they were smoother in comparison to the really, really textured part of the fur, I think you'd actually bring more attention to the eyes because of that textural contrast. Here, your eyes have a lot of the texture that the eyes this animal has, but if you smoothed out, especially like the bottom area around here, then I think that that smoothness would contrast with the really textured fur and help the eyes stand out even more. But aside from that, I think that you did a really fantastic job on this project, and I love that you sort of just made your background up. And I kind of wish that I had a background that looked like yours because I think that it gives it an illustrative look. Like it totally changes the characteristic of the artwork to have that more illustrated looking background as opposed to just bokeh circles. I'm going to jump here. I'm going to talk about the dog that you did after this one. This one here is same, like lovely characteristics. Again, the number one rule with pet portraits or portraits in general is capturing the likeness. I think that you got pretty close with the likeness of Nico. I feel like his eyes are just off a tiny bit, um, and his right ear. It's the eyes and the right ear. They're just off a touch. I can still if I look at it and I know that it's Nico, I can sort of see Nico in there a little bit, but the right ear, his right ear, left. Um, I'll just circle it. This ear, his right ear, that one throws me off just a tiny bit. And then also the eyes. I'm not sure what it is about the eyes. I feel like it's this eye here that's off a tiny bit that is changing the likeness, but I can still see Nico in there. And then of course the fur looks amazing. I love the way that you do fur. It has a scraggly, frizzy look, but it also has this really nice, soft underlayer that looks really nice. I love the touch of blue. I'm seeing touches of blue here. Maybe it's just the grayish blue, but it looks really, really nice. I love the colors that you used in the fur. It looks fantastic. There's a little notch right here cutting into his tongue. His tongue should be nice and round and smooth all the way through. But otherwise, I think that great job on the nose too. The nose looks really, really good, and the highlights in the eyes. Yeah, everything else looks fantastic. Um, you can, if you wanted to, I'm not saying you need to, but if you wanted to clean up the surrounding areas on the blank parts of the paper, you can use a kneaded eraser and roll it, same way you do with graphite. And then I wanted to talk to you about this one. This was your own project. Sorry, I just wanted to check the chat really quick before I move on. Beautiful work, by the way, Susan. Anyways, I I wanted to first compliment your colors. You captured the colors really, really well. I love to see the touch of blue. You changed the pillow blanket into blue, and whether intentional or not, but I see blue in the shadows, the reflections of the nose, blue here, blue here. So it's really important that anytime you change the color of an object, you use that color in other objects. You want to create that color harmony. I swear I see blue here and blue here. Um, but it so really well done on the colors. The colors look like one to one. Like the colors that you have on the head here look really close to the colors that you captured. The highlights, like this sort of light yellowish khaki color, very, very well done. The background, I think the background may I'm gonna just test it out really quick. I'm gonna grab this color here and I'm just going to cover up the background really quick. If so, I just grabbed that random brick color. I think that having a background darker than the main subject would have been the right choice here because it just seems to really bring the dog forward. Whereas you decided to go with a lighter background that is about the same value as the highlights in the dog. And so I think maybe a darker background would have been the choice because if you look at the reference photo, the background is noticeably darker than the dog, and that helps it stand out more. Yeah, that helps it stand out more. So you may consider that, and also, just think about that in the future when you're anytime you change a background, you want to know why you go with the background that you do. So, um, does the background take away or add to the project? And um, you, the background, say it's 10% of the artwork here, you could argue it about 10%, right? So it needs to make up that 10% well, because 10% is quite a bit. If you change it in a way that doesn't give to the artwork, then at best you're getting an A minus, right? So just make sure that when you change a background, you can answer the questions as to why you made it the way that you did. So in this case, when you change the background, when you look at the reference photo, take note of the fact that the background is darker than the main subject. Because it's darker, what does that do? It sort of cuts the subject out of the scene. It brings them forward. It sharpens the edges. With your lighter background, it doesn't do that, right? It doesn't bring the main subject forward. Instead, it sort of blends it into the background a little bit. So just keep those things in mind. The other thing that I wanted to talk about, similar to what I mentioned with Linda's portrait, is identifying key shapes that establish light and shadow. In this case, it's not so much about the shapes that distinguish light and shadow, but it's identifying shapes, period. So a good example would be this shape here. So this shape right here, around the doll, up into the ear, right? See that shape? That is a shape that when I outline it for you, you can clearly see, okay, that's just a dark shape, right? You can't totally tell what's happening inside the shape because all the values are rather dark, but it's an identifiable shape. And being able to identify these kinds of shapes make recreating the image so much easier. So if I take this shape and I bring it over here, where is that shape? That shape is not here, right? You don't, when I bring the outline here, even though it's the same spot, it works around the foot and around the teddy bear thing, up into the ear, across the face. You don't see the shape. So this big giant shape is missing from your artwork. And because it's missing, it changes the characteristics of the face. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to change the characteristics of the face because you're trying to make the drawing look, or trying to make the drawing capture the likeness of the original dog. So these shapes help establish that likeness. Now let's have a look at another shape. So let me just delete this, or I'll just hide that shape, right? Let's look at another shape just as another example here. But here I'm going to look at the eye. So here, this shape comes up and then it slants down into the shadow part of the fur. And there's like this little jagged fold of the cheek, right? And this is the eye. And then just for demonstrative purposes, here's this shape here, this sort of fold in the skin as well. Now, if I bring this shape over and I try to line it up with your eye, you can see that this angle, let me change the color here. So this angle of this line, right, is different than the angle that you have. You have this angle here. So you've changed the angle of the shape, and that fold no longer is the same characteristic fold of the face. And so when you approach complex subjects like a dog or a person or any complex object, doesn't matter what it is, try to break it down into the most basic two-dimensional shape grouping that you can. So, like I said, identifying this really big shape helps get accuracy to your artwork. with minimum effort. Just being able to see that shape and then identify that shape in the reference photo and then make sure that you can identify that same shape in your artwork. All right. I just wanted to talk through that really quick um, before moving on. But hopefully that helps and hopefully helps anybody else um, that may be struggling to capture likeness in their artwork because that's usually what our target is, especially when it comes to portraits. We want to capture that likeness. Yeah, going darker is always a scary thing. If you want a fun exercise that sort of takes the stress off, if you've done any of the early the first 12 monthly masteries where we only worked in values, we only worked in gray values, take three values, like take a dark gray, a middle gray, and a light gray. So no white, no pure black, just three distinct gray values, like a dark gray, middle gray, and a light gray. And see if you can break up your image. So if I go back to that project, Susan, um, go back to one of your images, try to break them up just into three shades and identify like the brightest shapes and the darkest shapes. You don't even have to worry about the shapes in between. Identify the darkest shapes and the brightest shapes. Fill in those two shapes. Everything else falls in the middle, just arbitrarily. So you have your dark gray that you fill in the dark shapes with, your light gray that you fill in the light shapes with, and then just fill everything else in with the middle. And with just those three values, you will establish the broad sort of light that creates the image that you're trying to replicate. If you were, and then ask yourself when you do that, when you have those three distinguished shapes and values, ask yourself, okay, if I were to start with this, like if I were to start with this as my line art, but really it's shapes, would my drawing be more accurate? And the answer is going to be yes. Because if you started with accurate shapes, just the accurate shapes, then you know where it's sort of it's kind of like line art, but it's more or less like knowing where the edges are that you can color. It's sort of like coloring within the lines a little bit. Line art is a little tricky in the sense that it can have more information, but if you just have shapes, then usually you're just going to be more accurate based off of that. So you may try that exercise. All right. Anyways, Cherry is up next. She, of course, did the Tarsia. And Cherry, I have to commend your background here. Your background looks so much better than mine. Your background looks so much better. The bokeh circles look really, really well done. The softness, the subdued colors. My background was rather vibrant, and I wasn't sure if I was going to like it. In the end, I did kind of like it, but I think that your background looks better because I like the natural colors that your background has. Also, I put a lot of bokeh circles in my background, and it's sort of distracting. Also, uh, your tarsia hands look better than the reference. Your tarsia hands look better than reference. The tail also looks very good. Wonderful texture and highlight on the tail. The tail looks phenomenal. Now the tree branch, you're sort of struggling with the same chaoticness or lack of chaoticness. Chaos, I guess, is an easier word to say. And that is making it look natural. a lot of your lines have a pattern to them of spacing. They all sort of have the same spacing. When I outline it in green, you can really see just how much of a pattern they seem to make a little bit. And this is, like I said, this is a really tricky thing to get through with adding chaos. Um, the highlights are better. Like you sort of just have a random highlight here, random highlight here, 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 all these random highlights. That's chaos. The highlights are good. The texture overall looks good, but the darker lines, they look a little bit too much like a pattern. And that's where you sort of lost the natural look of wood with your tree branch. But I just wanted to point that out. I know that it's tricky, it's hard to do. I don't even what does my tarsia look like, or my tree branch? I want to see my tree branch really quick. Okay, yeah. My tree branch has a bit of chaos. Uh, Here, I'll show you my tree branch really quick. So if we just zoom in, you can see that there's not there's nothing that distinguishes the tree branch in terms of pattern, right? It's sort of just, oops, that's the wrong button. Um, it just sort of is scattered, and then also I smooth it over on this side because it's kind of going away, and there's no need to have that pattern. This is where the pattern would emerge if there was a pattern. And I kept it random enough that there isn't that distinguished pattern. If I go back to yours, you can see these black lines having, even when they're broken, they don't go from one side all the way to the other. Even though they're broken, they have chaos in that way, but their spacing is very consistent. And you want to avoid that consistency, so you can see mine sort of just, and then I have one here, and I have two here, and I have like little ones, and so there is no identifiable pattern within those black lines that are cutting across the tree branch on mine, whereas yours just has a little bit more of that. So yeah, it's difficult for me to explain how to create that randomness, but the reality is you sort of have to shut your brain off, which is real hard to do. Really good job on the fur. Similar to Susan, with the transition from the dark shapes to the light shapes. These shapes here struggle just a little bit to have that natural looking transition. They sort of just look like little black stripes almost. They look more like stripes, whereas they're supposed to be subtle folds of the skin and the fur going around them. Same thing with this one here. This one's just a little bit close as far as like the edge being kind of sharp. Um, but overall, really good. Good good job on the eyes, creating that spherical shape. They look quite spherical. I think they could be darker in some spots. Hold on, I'm trying to look. Yeah, so if you let me just grab this. Yeah, sure. So if I darken this part of the eye and this part of the eye, and let's just blur and overlay. Let's go darken. Sure, darken. I just want to darken that part of the eye a little bit. You can see with just the smallest amount of change that the eyes just becomes super three-dimensional, right? The problem that you have here is that um, before adding the final highlights, the below the highlights, so underneath the highlights, the eye didn't quite have the change in values to make it very spherical. The highlights give it the spherical look, but you can see that if you had that change in value, very simple shape, right? Just very elementary in shape as far as creating a sphere goes, and the eyes just become super three-dimensional. So you want to keep that in mind with your eyes in general. Just every animal is going to be like this. You want to have that base spherical value change whenever you're doing your eyes. And sometimes that it doesn't need to be textured. It just needs to be a gradient, right? Hey there, Chrissy. I am actually doing very well, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad you're able to catch the live stream as well. Anna and I, we got back from a short little trip. We drove up to Gdańsk over the weekend, and yeah, Udon was being noodle sat uh, by his grandma, I guess, my mother-in-law, and he was not a good boy. He escaped from his enclosure twice, and uh, my mother-in-law, she doesn't mind udon. Like she was never like Anna in the sense like Anna said that if he ever touches her, then she's moving out. Um, which obviously isn't the case now, but it took her a long time to warm up to him. My mother-in-law didn't really ever have a problem with him, but that doesn't mean that she wants him out and about while she's staying here. And so he broke out of his enclosure a couple times over the weekend. Um, and I'm almost done with his new enclosure, so he'll never be able to break out again. But it was kind of funny. Uh, Anyways, all right. I'm gonna move on to the next your next project, Cherry. Cherry worked ahead and did this portrait. This is the AI portrait that we are currently working on, if you are unaware of that. Um, and she obviously made some changes to her project because the colors are different. She didn't do like the redness. She has a more natural yellow tone of skin with some nice reds and pinks. Um, you did mention that you didn't quite get the eyes right. Also, the eyebrows look a little straight. The eyebrows look like they look like caterpillars just straight across her face. And that the eyebrows are really expressive. So you have to be careful with changing the expression the eyebrows have in portraits. Here, because they look very flat, they sort of give her a bored or just uninterested expression in her face. The part that you got slightly wrong with the eyes, first off, this pupil is off center. That pupil on the left, our left, this pupil is off center a little bit, and this eye needs to go that way, just a touch. Yeah, eyes can be finicky. So finicky, in fact, that the AI that created this portrait also got the eyes wrong. So don't feel too bad. The skin looks really good. The lips look great. I really like the color you did with the lips. Um, the hair, the hair is tricky because the portrait doesn't have realistic hair. It has a very digital art stylized looking kind of hair. So the hair's a little bit tricky, and I haven't gone over that in the project yet. So I commend you for the approach. Um, but the hair, your hair here looks so you have spaghetti hair, which uh, I'm not saying you have spaghetti hair. I mean, there is spaghetti hair. You've heard me describe spaghetti hair. This is like linguine hair. So you have like the wider flat noodles, and they're just wider, flatter noodles. So you don't have spaghetti hair. You have linguine hair, which I wasn't even aware existed until just now. Or lasagna hair. You have like full lasagna noodles just wrapped around her head. Lasagna is a lot easier to say than linguine. But you did a really good job. Portraits are never easy, so I commend you for doing this one on your own. I think it's always important to go out and do projects on your own. So I think that you did a good job on this one, for sure. All right, now on to the monthly masteries. I have three of them here. This is the reference photo that I'm going to judge all of you on. First up is Diane. And Diane, did you do this in colored pencil or pastel? Because it looks like both. I'm usually no, this is colored pencil, right? This is colored pencil. Yeah, this has to be colored pencil. I'm usually very good. I'm usually very good at determining the medium. Please tell me this is colored pencil. Uh, yeah, this one's okay, good. Uh, I have to commend you on the one of the smoothest colored pencil drawings I think I've ever seen. Because there's like no paper showing through. So excellent work on covering the paper. What paper did you use here, by the way? The colors look pretty good. Yeah, the colors look quite good. Yeah. Now I have to judge the colors with a little bit of the caveat of it being a photo, and photos are never accurate to the colors, but the yellow looks a little bit green on the highlight. The orange is missing a bit of red for sure in the shadows. The green cube looks quite good. This is a Canson. Oh, really? So it's like the Canson pastel paper with like the honeycomb texture. Interesting. Is it a white paper? Was this a white paper or a tan paper? Well, happy early birthday, Alicia. All right, so let's talk about the background first. The background, for whatever reason, looks milky. Should be darker. The background for sure should be darker, but that could be the reference photo. But to me, it kind of looks milky. Um, so this background it's dark. It's really dark brown, really desaturated dark brown. Value wise, yeah, the milkiness. Maybe if I do this, yeah, it's still milky even like in the darkest parts of the background. So the background could be a little bit darker. So this is white paper. Um, the let's talk about the tabletop. The tabletop is probably the hardest color. It's totally black in the background. Interesting. Yeah, it's just got to be the photo then. The hardest color to match is the table. It's so difficult. I don't know if anybody got it right. I think Linda might be the closest though. Um, so we have this color here and we have this color here for the tabletop. This is your dark color, which is not nearly dark enough. And then we have the light color, which is definitely light enough, but almost too light, actually. and also not enough color. The the surface here is like sand, like the color of like wet sand. It's or damp sand. It's such a difficult color to match. I can't tell you how many times I've tried to match this myself. Um, it is a difficult color to match. The tabletop is the hardest color. And I think for your tabletop color, I'm going to have to give you a D. Okay. I'm going to give you a D on the tabletop color, um, because I know it is tough, but I think that you can do better for sure. The half sphere, the dome, the orange is very good. The orange, like right here, is like spot on, like spot on. The shadow, however, is not. The shadow, you're missing all the red. You're missing all the red in the shadow. So see, this is the shadow right here. You see how red that is? Super, super red. So your shadow is missing all the red. Also the value. It's not dark enough and it's not red. Um, the cube is very good. The cube is like spot on. This green, very, very close to this green. I grabbed the wrong one. Maybe let me hold on a second. Let me just you're very close on the green. Let me just find it. Because doing pixel by pixel sometimes it's just difficult. There we go. So your green is very good on the light and the shadow. The shadows, yeah. Yours is just a touch less saturated, but that could be the photo. Um, so the cube is like a solid A on the cube. I'd say C plus, C plus on the dome because you got the oranges right, but you're missing the red. So you get a C on that. The yellow, like I said, there's a little bit too much green in your yellow. That could also be the photo, but a little bit too much green. That green is making it less orange. So you're heading in the wrong direction as you so you have yellow and it goes from yellow to blue and yellow to red, the primary colors. And your yellow needs to go slightly towards the red because it's a little bit orangier in the reference photo. And you went a little bit more towards blue, so it's leaning towards the green part. Now, if you go to the shadow on the cone, you'll see the green. You have the green. So here's the shadow of the cone, and you can clearly see there's green there. And you do have green, but not quite the right amount. You have a little bit too much blue. You actually have a green that's a little bit too much blue and slightly lighter than it should be. But the cone is also rather tricky. You could also aim for this color, which is still a yellower one, but a little bit more just mustard color. But yeah, this transition on the cone, very tricky. Very, very tricky. I'll give you a B on the cone because those colors are hard and you still captured it pretty decently. Now the cylinder here, I think your darkest color is really close. Like your darkest color is pretty close. Um, Now, for whatever reason, the really dark colors are not photographing very well. So I'd say that that's pretty close. Visually, it looks rather correct. The highlight color is much too blue. So you're leaning towards the blue side of purple where you need to go towards the violet red type of purple. So here's your highlight purple, and the purple you'll see lots of red. You're not colorblind, are you, Diane? I don't mean to sound like super rude, but sometimes people have a difficulty seeing red, and I'm wondering if maybe you don't see red that well. I'm just curious. That's all. Because you missed a lot of red in the orange, and you're missing the red also in the purple. Your purple is much more towards the blue side than the red side, and it should be the other way around. Um, but overall, I'd say a B minus. Yeah, I'd say a B minus. The tabletop is not close at all, which arguably, like I said, it is the most difficult. The tabletop is the hardest color to match, and it's in all of these. So you're gonna have plenty of practice getting the tabletop colors. Um, so yeah, a solid B minus on this one. Uh, just try to just try to match your colors a little bit more. But the the execution is a solid A. Yeah, the execution is a solid A. So you're good. Then we have Cherry. Cherry did this in pastels. This looks quite good. The tabletop is nowhere near the correct color. Yeah, your tabletop is a little bit too yellow and a little bit too light, but not terrible. You're like you have the right color tone, but it's the wrong value. I feel like you have the color here. Almost. Still a little bit too yellow, but better. This color here, where you have the gradient, is the color that you should have up here. Tabletop's a little bit too bright. So you got the value wrong, and you're close on the color back in this area. Still a little bit too much yellow though. Um, the background is too light. Yeah, the background's too light, but it could be the photo, so I won't um, say any more about that. So for the tabletop, I'd give you a B. Yeah, I think for the tabletop you get a B. You're pretty close on the color, on the chroma. You're just a little bit too bright. Um, I didn't even talk about Diane's shadows. Her shadows looked good, but your shadows look a little bit too dark. No, they're good. Maybe it's just, oh, it's an optical illusion. The reason they look dark is because your tabletop is too bright. But yeah, your shadows are good. Okay, let's do the dome. Your dome looks really good. Yeah, it looks really good. So here's the, yeah, yeah, depending on where I grab, that's pretty much the same color. Your shadow does have the nice rich red, and it's too bright, which I suspected because it didn't look very three-dimensional. So you have the red, but you're missing the value. So I'll do a C. On the dome, you get a C. So you got a B, you got a C. The green, for sure, not dark enough, but you have the right shade here. That's a little bit too light. A little bit too light. And yeah, so your cube is way too light, but the colors are pretty close. I'm gonna do a C also on the cube. The yellow looks good. Yeah, the yellow has the correct tone, correct value. This looks like it has that touch of green, but it's too light. But the color on the cone is very difficult. I think this is a solid B on the cone because you have the right tone of yellow. Just again, not dark enough, but you have the green in the shadow in that transition. So that's very good. It's just not dark enough. So yeah, B. The purple has the right shade of purple, so you're leaning a little bit more towards the red side of purple. Um, Pretty good there. Again, it's a little bit too light. You have this whole gradient over here where the gradient is only happening right here. Remember, all of this is in shadow. That's all shadow. Only that part is the light. You can see it's like it's basically just all dark purple and then just a sliver of light because the light source is coming from The light source is coming from that way. So you only have this small section of light on the cylinder. But the purple tone looks good. This looks a little bit too light, this lavender color. Yeah, we zoom in. Get the brightest purple on that edge there. So I'm going to give you a C on the cylinder because it's much too light. Uh, so overall B minus. Yeah, overall B minus on this. Excellent coverage, just like Diane's. Up next is Linda, the last one. Linda, I think you mentioned that you were struggling to cover the paper, so I won't. I mean, you covered the paper, but this paper has a tremendous amount of texture showing up in the reference photo. Um, yeah, the dark colors again, but a B is a solid grade on this project because this is the first monthly mastery where you have to match all the colors. So it is quite difficult. Any advice on fixing your traditional art? I would need to have a frame of reference. Like fixing your traditional art is so vast of possibilities that I need to know where you're starting for me to give you advice that would be helpful in any way. Everything that I'm saying about these projects, though, you can apply right to your work. Um, okay, background looks good. Tabletop looks it looks close, but it's definitely too gray. So you're missing some saturation on the tabletop. I'm going to ignore the texture because I don't think it'd be fair otherwise. So let me grab this color here. Here's your tabletop. Gosh, that's really close. Yeah, I mean, let me just try to grab something that looks, that's pretty close. Yeah, I mean, in spite of the texture is sort of throwing me off. Um, But yeah, that's pretty close for the color. It's still missing a little bit of saturation. Let's double check this background color. So yours, let me see if I can find it anywhere. Nah, see, the transition is where you lost me. Yeah, the transition is a little bit too light. That transition back there, and this shadow also a little bit too light. Maybe right here. Yeah, there you go. Look at that. So this transition that you had right in this area, that's the color that you need right here. Your gradient needs to have that color there um, into your dark background. All right. So the tabletop, I think you get a B. Yeah, I think B plus even. Yeah, the tabletop color B plus. Just don't. I don't know what's going on with the paper, but I think you said that too. Yeah, the paint on paper. Yeah, it looks so textured for some reason. But good job on the coverage. I know that must have been a headache. The orange looks pretty good. Yeah, the orange looks good here. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Maybe that orange there. Yeah, there you go. Okay. Uh, Still need more red. Yeah, definitely need more red. I'm pulling the darkest red I can off of yours. But you have the red coming in. It's just you need more, and it needs to be darker. Um, on the monthly masteries, okay. I want you guys for the next monthly mastery. Wait a minute. Oh no, I just remembered. I didn't upload the next monthly mastery, which I'm glad I didn't because I want to talk about these monthly masteries before you start the next one. I want you to push it to the limit. Go as dark as you possibly can. Don't, on the monthly masteries, stop being afraid of using the darkest values, the darkest colors, the most vibrant colors. Don't care about the monthly masteries in the way that you care about like the big projects. These ones are just supposed to be the exercises where you get to you get to stretch, right? You get to stretch and you get to push things. So get those dark values. Don't be afraid of messing it up in any way whatsoever. You have to risk that with the monthly masteries. If you don't risk it on any project, then you'll never really know what you're missing out on until you finally do risk it. So the consistency that I'm seeing with the monthly mastery 16 right now is that everybody is sort of holding back on how dark they can go, especially on on the dome. On the orange dome, nobody is going dark enough. And so I want you to push it on the next monthly mastery. I want you to push it as far. I want you to push it beyond what you are afraid. So if you're like looking at it and you're like, I'm not sure if I should go darker, then go darker. Go darker than what you think you should go darker. Okay, that's what I want you to do. Even at the expense of getting the color wrong, I would prefer you to get the value correct because at the end of the day, the value is more important than the color. Okay. So I just needed a ramble on that. You got the red, just not dark enough. Solid B on the dome, solid B on the table. The green, there's no way this green is right. Yeah, this green is not saturated enough. That not dark enough. Yeah, it's close. It's the right shade, not dark enough though. But the light part is way too blue. It's like a foam green almost, like a sea foam green. Um, I'm gonna give you a I'm gonna give you a D. I gotta give you a D on the cube. The colors are not close. The shadow color is kind of close, but part of that is just the value being darker. Yeah, the cube, the green is pretty far off there. The yellow I can already see is a little bit pure yellow and not quite touching the orange, but still pretty close. As you can see, this is a little bit greener um, comparatively to the more orangey. The shadow looks pretty good. Actually, the shadow looks almost spot on. Just about. Yeah. Depending on where I grab, I can get that value. Yeah. Yeah. The shadow's almost perfect. It's the light side that is just a touch off. It needs to just go towards the orange. Actually, you might have it right here. Yeah, just about. Like right in the transition, you do hit it. Yeah, you do hit it. Okay, so let's say a B plus on the cone because you definitely got the colors there. They exist. It's just being distorted by the paper. Um, this cylinder looks like the correct shade of purple here, like in that spot there. That is definitely the correct shade of purple. If I get like the darkest, then you're like spot on basically. But the gradient is not happening in the correct location. So I'm going to go with a C. So B, B, D, B plus, C, let's say B minus. I think B minus is fair on this one, Linda. You did considering you worked on paper by a different paper by accident, and you sort of had to deal with the texture. In spite of that, your accuracy on colors was really good, with the exception of the cube. Um, and so yeah, solid B minus. I think, because of the cube. The cube being quite far away from the correct colors sort of hurt you there, but your execution is very, very good. Your color accuracy, for the most part, is very, very good. Um, and I think that with what I give you here, you can do the next monthly mastery and move up to a B plus or maybe even A minus. All right. Um, I'm done grading you guys on the monthly masteries. That's all the projects that I have. So I hope that you enjoyed the live stream today. It was a lot of fun. I always enjoy seeing your guys' artwork, so I appreciate you taking the time to submit it and hang out with me and all of that stuff. So hopefully you learned something, and I will have the new monthly mastery put up, monthly mastery 17. Um, I'll have that put up this weekend so you guys can start working on it. But remember, push the limits, go beyond what you feel comfortable with because you have to. You know, if if you want to get flexible, you can't just stay within the range of motion that you always move. You have to push yourself to feel that stretch. And the same thing with your artwork here. You have to push yourself beyond what you feel comfortable. That's when you know you're going to progress, that you're going to gain that flexibility, you're going to gain that perspective. Because if you always safely stay within your range of motion, you'll never go beyond where you are. So you have to push it. So definitely for the next monthly mastery, I want to see everybody push it. I would rather see darker values in your artwork than lighter ones. So you could submit the next monthly mastery where every shadow is pure black, and I would be more satisfied with that than having shadows that are not dark enough. Okay? But don't do that. And I'll see you on Monday. We'll continue the. We don't have a pastel project. I'll see you on Monday. I'll figure out what we're doing. All right. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you. Take care. Peace.